I let the police arrest my own mother-in-law. Brenda has always been the kind of woman who sends back water at a restaurant because the ice cubes aren't uniform. When I first started dating my wife Sarah 6 years ago, I thought her mom was just a little particular. It didn't take long to realize she was just chronically entitled. She is the textbook definition of a Karen before the internet even had a word for it. She snaps her fingers at service workers, she demands to speak to managers over coupons that expired in 2018, and she genuinely believes the world was built to cater to her specific moods. Sarah is a saint, but she grew up with this, so her default response has always been to just keep peace. For years, I bit my tongue at family dinners when Brenda would insult my cooking or make snide comments about my career. When I used to work in corporate finance, but 3 years ago, I took a massive leap and opened my own artisanal bakery and coffee shop. It was my dream. I poured my entire life savings into it, worked 80-hour weeks to get it off the ground, and finally it became really successful. We have a great local following and a line out the door most weekends. The problem started about a year ago when Brenda realized my shop was a great place for her to show off. At first, she would just come in, grab a drip coffee, and sit in the corner. But as the place got more popular, her behavior escalated. She started skipping the line entirely, walking right up to the pickup counter and demanding free lattes and expensive pastries. She would tell my staff that she practically owned the place because her son-in-law was the boss. And I told Sarah we needed to set boundaries because my employees were getting stressed out. Sarah talked to her mom, and of course Brenda threw a massive tantrum claiming we were disrespecting our elders and that family should always get VIP treatment. She stayed away for a couple of weeks, but eventually she started coming back. I instituted a strict policy with my staff: do not give her anything for free and make her wait in line like everyone else. If she argues, come get me. That brings us to this past Saturday. It was our busiest morning of the week. We had a line wrapping around the block, and my staff was working at max capacity just trying to keep up. I was in the small back office doing payroll and inventory when I heard the yelling. Now, it wasn't just loud talking, it was the shrill, piercing shriek that Brenda only uses when she is absolutely denied her way. I walked out of the office and saw the entire cafe had gone dead silent. Everyone in line was staring. There was Brenda standing at the main register with 3 of her wealthy book club friends looking incredibly smug. Behind the counter was Mia, one of my best employees. She is 19 years old, working her way through nursing school, and she is the sweetest kid you could ever meet. Mia was shaking and looked like she was about to cry. I walked up and asked what was going on. Brenda rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. She told me that this incompetent little girl was refusing to serve them their drinks and wanted them to stand outside in the heat with the commoners. And Brenda had ordered 4 of our most complicated specialty drinks and half a dozen imported pastries and expected it all on the house immediately. Mia looked at me with tears in her eyes and told me she just asked them to please join the back of the line so she could help the customers who had been waiting for 20 minutes. I nodded at Mia and turned to my mother-in-law. I kept my voice perfectly calm and told her that Mia was right. I told Brenda she needed to go to the back of the line, and when she got to the front, she would be paying full price just like everybody else. Brenda's face turned completely purple. Her friends started backing away looking embarrassed, but Brenda just doubled down. She started screaming at me in front of 50 customers. Now, she called me a failure and ungrateful little brat and said that without her daughter, I would be nothing. I told her she needed to leave my store immediately or I was going to call the cops. She laughed right in my face. She told me I didn't have the guts and that I was bluffing. Then, to prove some kind of twisted point, she reached out and shoved our entire retail display of expensive ceramic coffee mugs right off the counter. Dozens of mugs shattered all over the floor. The sound was deafening. Ceramic went flying everywhere, and one piece actually grazed a customer leg. Mia jumped back, covering her face, and Brenda just stood there, panting, looking at me like she had won. I didn't say a single word. I just pulled my phone out of my pocket, dialed 911, and reported a violent customer destroying property. When Brenda realized I was actually on the phone with dispatch, her smugness completely evaporated. She tried to storm out, but a couple of the regular customers who had been waiting in line actually blocked the doorway so she couldn't leave. She started crying on cue, putting her hands to her chest, and hyperventilating, acting like she was having a medical emergency. Her friends had already slipped out the side door, leaving her completely alone. The police arrived about 5 minutes later. Brenda instantly ran up to them, pointing at me and playing the fragile elderly victim. She told the officers that I had violently attacked her and pushed the display over to try and hurt her. She squeezed out fake tears and said she was terrified for her life. The older cop looked at me and asked for my side of the story. I didn't even bother explaining. I just asked them to follow me to the back office and hold up the high-definition security footage from the camera positioned directly over the register. We watched the whole thing in crystal clear 4K video. We saw her screaming at Mia, we saw me walk up, and we saw her intentionally sweep her arm across the counter to smash the merchandise. The officers walked back out to the front. Brenda was sitting at a table sipping a cup of water a customer had given her, still playing up the victim act. The officer pulled out his handcuffs and told her she was being placed under arrest for destruction of property and disturbing the peace. The look of absolute shock on her face is something I will never forget for the rest of my life. She started thrashing and screaming for me to help her, as she kept yelling that we were family and that I needed to tell them it was a misunderstanding. I just stood there with a broom in my hand, sweeping up the broken ceramic, and told the officers I would be pressing full charges and wanted a trespass order filed immediately. They walked her out to the cruiser in handcuffs right past the giant line of customers who actually started clapping. Sarah was furious when she first got the call from the police station, but once she came down to the shop and I showed her the security footage, she went completely quiet. She didn't bail her mother out. Brenda had to sit in a holding cell for 14 hours until my father-in-law finally drove down to get her. We sent her a bill for the broken merchandise, and the court mandated that she pay it as part of her plea deal to avoid jail time. And she still posts on Facebook every day about how her evil son-in-law ruined her life, but at least she has to do it from 500 feet away. The aftermath was a slow burn of family fallout that I had been dreading for years, but also welcoming in a weird way. My father-in-law, Robert, is a quiet man who spent 30 years in insurance and another 30 years apologizing for Brenda's existence. When he finally got her home from the station that night, he didn't call me. He didn't text. He just sent a Venmo for the $450 worth of ruined ceramics with a note that said, "Sorry." Sarah didn't talk to me for the first 24 hours. She didn't defend her mom, but she was mourning the fact that her family dynamic had finally officially blown up. She sat on our sofa staring at the wall while I made dinner in silence, and the smell of the shop, roasted espresso and burnt sugar, was still stuck in my hair and clothes. I felt a weird mix of adrenaline and total exhaustion. "She's telling everyone you hit her, Mark," Sarah finally said. Her voice was flat. "I know," I said. "I saw the Facebook post. She said I lunged at her and she knocked the mugs over in self-defense." "The video doesn't lie," Sarah whispered. "I watched it 6 times. I watched her look you in the eye and just break everything. She looked like she enjoyed it." That was the turning point for Sarah. She had spent her life being gaslit into thinking her mother's episodes were just expressions of a strong personality. Seeing that raw footage of Brenda deliberately trying to ruin my livelihood was the cold water Sarah needed. By Monday morning, the local gossip mill was in high gear. My shop is in a relatively tight-knit suburb where everyone knows everyone's business. Brenda's book club friends, the ones who scrambled out the side door like rats, had apparently spent the rest of Saturday telling anyone who would listen that I was a maniac and a danger to the community. I walked into the shop at 5 a.m. to start the ovens. The air was cool and the street was empty. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Brenda was banned, legally banned. If she stepped foot on the sidewalk in front of my window, I could call the cops and she'd be back in that cell. Around 8 a.m., the morning rush rush hit. I expected some blowback. I expected people to side with the poor grandmother who got arrested. Instead, the first person in line was Mrs. Gable, a regular who had been there on Saturday. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked up to Mia, who was still looking a bit shaky, and handed her a bouquet of grocery store carnations. "You did a good job, honey," Mrs. Gable said. Then she looked at me. "Glad you finally tossed the trash out, Mark. She's been a nightmare in this town for 20 years. It was like a dam broke. For the next 3 hours, person after person came in, not just for coffee, but to check on us. People who had been bullied by Brenda at the PTA, at the grocery store, and at the dry cleaners were coming out of the woodwork. Apparently, Brenda had a long history of making service workers' lives hell, and seeing her finally face actual consequences was the highlight of the year for half the neighborhood. But Brenda wasn't going to go down without a fight. On Tuesday, I got a call from a lawyer. Not a high-end city lawyer, but a guy Brenda knows from her country club. He told me that Brenda was planning on suing me for emotional distress and defamation of character. He claimed that my security footage was misleading and that I had provoked her into a mental breakdown. I told him to talk to my insurance company's legal team and hung up. I wasn't scared. You can't sue someone for reporting a crime you actually committed on camera. The real tension, though, was at home. Sarah's brother Jeff called her on Wednesday screaming. Jeff is the golden child. He lives 2 states away and only sees Brenda on holidays, so he gets the best version of her. He told Sarah that I was a bully and that if I didn't drop the charges, he was going to make sure I was cut off from the family. Sarah finally found her backbone. She told Jeff that if he cared so much, he could come pick up their mother and take her to live with him. Jeff hung up. He hasn't called back since. A week after the incident, things took a darker turn. I arrived at the shop to find traitor and abuser spray painted in jagged red letters across my front window. My heart dropped. I checked the cameras. It was 2 a.m. A figure in a heavy hoodie and a face mask had done it. They were careful to stay in the shadows, but I knew the gait. I knew the way that person moved. It wasn't Brenda. It was her younger brother, my uncle-in-law Gary. Gary is a deadbeat who Brenda occasionally bails out of debt, so he's essentially her hired muscle. I didn't even hesitate. I called the same officer who had arrested Brenda. "Back again, Mark?" Officer Higgins asked, looking at the graffiti. "Check the gate, officer," I said, pointing to the footage. "Compare it to Gary Miller's priors. He's got that limp from his motorcycle accident." The cops went to Gary's house. They found the red spray paint in his garage. Gary folded in 10 minutes. He admitted Brenda had paid him $500 to send a message to me. Now, Brenda wasn't just facing a destruction of property charge. She was facing conspiracy to commit vandalism and witness intimidation. The misunderstanding was turning into a felony-level problem. The following Sunday was our family's traditional dinner night. Obviously, we didn't go to Brenda. We stayed home. But Robert, my father-in-law, showed up at our door at 6 p.m. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a week. He sat at our kitchen table and put his head in his hands. "She won't stop, Sarah," he said. She's obsessed. She spends all day on the phone with lawyers and all night pacing the house talking about how she's going to burn the shop down. Metaphorically, I hope. Dad, she's sick, Sarah said. "She needs help, not a lawyer." "She won't take help," Robert sighed. "She wants blood. Mark, she's asking me to empty our retirement fund to fight this. She wants to take you to trial. She wants to make Mia testify so she can break her on the stand." I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. "She touches Mia or any of my staff, and I stop being nice, Robert. I've been as patient as I can be." "I know," Robert said. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a spark of something like respect. "I'm leaving her, Mark. I packed a bag. I'm staying at the Marriott." That was the bomb. The saintly Brenda, the pillar of the community, saw the woman who demanded uniform ice cubes, had finally pushed her husband of 40 years out the door, and she blamed me for every single bit of it. 2 weeks later was the preliminary hearing. Brenda showed up in a Chanel suit, looking like she was going to a gala rather than a courtroom. She had this frozen, haughty smile on her face. She really thought she was going to walk in there, charm the judge, and make me look like a villain. When the judge asked how she pleaded, she tried to give a speech. "Your Honor, this is a family matter that has been blown out of proportion by an aggressive and disgruntled young man who..." The judge banged the gavel. "Save it for your counsel, Mrs. Miller. How do you plead?" "Not guilty," she snapped. Then the DA played the video. In a quiet courtroom, with the sound of 50 ceramic mugs shattering sounds like a gunshot. The sight of Brenda deliberately sweeping her arm across the counter, then laughing in my face, was impossible to ignore. The judge leaned forward, his glasses sliding down his nose. He looked at Brenda, then at the video, then back at Brenda. "Mrs. Miller," the judge said, his voice dangerously low, "I see a woman intentionally destroying property and creating a public disturbance. I also see a report here regarding your brother, Mr. Miller, and his claims that you solicited him to vandalize the victim's business." Brenda's lawyer tried to jump in, but the judge held up a hand. "I am setting a trial date, but given the evidence of witness intimidation, I am modifying your bail conditions. You are to have 0 contact, direct or indirect, with the victim, his wife, or any employees of the business. You are also fitted with a GPS ankle monitor to ensure you stay outside the 500-foot exclusion zone." Brenda let out a sound like a wounded animal. A lady like her with an ankle monitor? It was her worst nightmare. She looked at Sarah, who was sitting in the back row, and screamed, "How could you let him do this to me?" Sarah didn't flinch. She just looked at her mother with something that wasn't even anger anymore. It was just pity. "You did this to yourself, Mom. We just stopped stopping you." The months leading up to the trial were surprisingly quiet. With the ankle monitor on, Brenda was effectively trapped in her house. She couldn't go to her usual spots: the cafe, the high-end grocer, and the boutique, because they were all too close to the shop or within the harassment zone the judge had carved out. She became a pariah. Her book club friends stopped calling. It turns out, when you can't offer people expensive wine and status, they don't really want to hang out with a woman who has a court-mandated tracking device on her leg. Business at the shop actually increased. We became the place that stood up to the neighborhood bully. I hired another person to help Mia so she wouldn't have to work the front alone. Mia's confidence came back. She realized that the world wasn't just full of Brendas. It was full of people who would stand up for her too. The day of the final sentencing arrived. Brenda had finally taken a plea deal. The evidence was just too overwhelming. So she pleaded guilty to misdemeanor destruction of property and a reduced charge of disorderly conduct. The conspiracy charges were dropped in exchange for her paying the full restitution and agreeing to a permanent restraining order. She had to stand in front of the court and apologize. She stood there, her hands shaking, reading from a piece of paper her lawyer had clearly written for her. Her voice was thin and brittle. "I apologized to Mark and his staff for my actions on the morning of Saturday the 14th, she droned. "My behavior was inappropriate," and the judge prompted. "And I agreed to pay the restitution of $4,200 for the damages and legal fees," she whispered. I sat in the front row and watched her. She wouldn't look at me. She looked like a small, bitter, lonely woman. And the power she had held over Sarah and Robert for decades had evaporated the second someone treated her like a common criminal instead of a difficult matriarch. When it was over, I walked out into the sunlight. Sarah was waiting for me by the car. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm okay." "She's moving," Sarah said. "Dad told me this morning. She's selling the house and moving to a condo in Florida. She says the people here don't appreciate her class." "Good," I said. "I hope she likes the ice cubes down there." We drove back to the shop. It was a Saturday morning, exactly 1 year since the mug-shattering incident. There was a line out the door. The smell of fresh croissants and roasting beans hit me as soon as I opened the door. Mia was at the register. She saw us and grinned. "Hey guys, we're slammed. Mark, we need more cinnamon rolls in the case." "On it," I said. I went to the back, put on my apron, and started working. About an hour into the rush, I noticed a new display on the counter. It was a single ceramic mug, one of the few that hadn't broken that day. It sat on a small pedestal with a little sign Mia had made. It read, "In this shop, we wait in line, no exception." I looked out the window. The sun was shining on the sidewalk where Brenda used to stand and scream. There was no one there but happy customers, the sound of the grinder, and the quiet, steady hum of a life I had finally reclaimed. My father-in-law, Robert, came in around noon. He didn't look tired anymore. He had a new haircut and was wearing a shirt that wasn't ironed into stiff creases. He ordered a black coffee, paid full price, and left a $5 tip. See you Sunday for dinner, Mark? He asked. Your house or ours? I asked. Mine, he smiled. I'm learning how to grill. It's quiet at my new place. Real quiet. I watched him walk out and join the flow of people on the street. Brenda was gone. The drama was over. The shop was thriving. Sometimes people tell you that you'll have to forgive family no matter what. They tell you that blood is thicker than water. But as I looked at the not guilty 4K footage, I still kept on my phone, just in case. I knew that wasn't true. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a family is to let them face the consequences of their own choices. I picked up a broom and started sweeping. There wasn't any broken ceramic left, but I liked the routine of it. Everything was clean. Everything was in its place. And for the first time in 6 years, well, the ice cubes were exactly the way I liked them. The peace lasted for about 6 months. Florida was supposed to be Brenda's new kingdom, a place where she could reinvent herself as a wealthy socialite among the palm trees and retirees. But Brenda doesn't change. She just finds new people to antagonize. By the time the humidity hit 90% in July, the phone calls to Sarah started again. At first, it was just the usual complaint. The humidity was ruining her hair. The condo board was run by communists, and the pool water was 2 degrees too warm. Sarah would listen on speakerphone while we folded laundry or prepped for the next day's bake. Just shake my head. Sarah had gotten better at the gray rock method, giving short, non-committal answers that gave Brenda nothing to feed on. And then came the medical emergency, the classic play in the entitled Parent Handbook. Around 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, Sarah's phone buzzed with a series of frantic texts and the ER chest pains. Doctors aren't listening. I need my daughter. Sarah turned pale, her old conditioning kicking in. Mark, I have to go. What if it's real this time? It's always a possibility, I said, trying to be the grounded one. But remember who we're talking about. Call the hospital directly. Don't call her back yet. Sarah called the hospital in Boca Raton. It took 20 minutes to get a nurse on the line. When Sarah asked about Brenda Miller, the nurse sighed. A long, weary sound that told us everything we needed to know. Your mother is physically fine, ma'am, the nurse said. She was brought in for observation after a public disturbance at a country club. She claimed she was having a heart attack when the manager asked her to leave the dining room for berating a server. Her vitals are perfect. Actually, she's currently being escorted out by security because she tried to throw a pitcher of water at an orderly. Sarah hung up the phone and sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry. She just looked tired. She's never going to stop, is she? She stops when you stop playing the game, I said. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at the shop. It wasn't from a lawyer this time. It was a handwritten letter from Brenda, 12 pages long, on expensive floral stationery. I opened it in the back office, right under the 4K camera that had been her undoing. It was a manifesto of delusion. She blamed the stress of the arrest for her failing health. She claimed that Florida was full of low-class people and that she was planning on moving back. But the kicker was at the end. She told me that she had written a will and was officially disinheriting Sarah unless I sold the bakery, moved Sarah to Florida, and issued a public apology on the town's Facebook community page admitting that I had framed her. I didn't even show it to Sarah. I just put it in the Brenda file I kept for my lawyer and went back to pulling shots of espresso. The real test came in October. Robert had been flourishing in his new life. He'd started coming to the shop every Saturday morning, not just for coffee, but to help me break down delivery boxes in the back. He liked the manual labor, the honest sweat of it, but he'd lost 15 pounds and looked younger than I'd ever seen him. He'd officially filed for divorce, and Brenda was fighting him for every cent of his pension. One Saturday, Robert walked in looking shaken. He didn't go to the back. He sat at the counter and waited for the rush to die down. She's here, Mark, he whispered. In the shop? I felt my hand tighten around the steam wand. No, she's at the house. My house. She used her old key. I forgot to change the deadbolt on the side door. She's refused to leave. She says it's her marital home and she's reclaiming her life. I looked at the clock. It was 11:30 a.m. I called the local precinct. I didn't ask for a favor. I just reported a domestic trespass in progress. The restraining order is still in effect, right? I asked the dispatcher. It is, sir. Now we're sending a unit to Mr. Miller's address now. I told Mia to take over the floor and hopped in the car with Robert. When we pulled into his driveway, Brenda's white Mercedes was parked crookedly across the lawn, rutting the grass. She was standing on the front porch, screaming at 2 patrol officers. She was wearing a massive sun hat and holding a glass of wine at noon. This is my house, she was shrieking. I picked out these curtains. I birthed the children who walk these halls. You cannot remove a queen from her castle. The officers looked like they wanted to be anywhere else on earth. When she saw my car pull up, her face transformed. The fragile victim mask didn't even come out this time. It was pure, unadulterated malice. You! She pointed a shaking finger at me. You poisoned everyone! You took my husband! You took my daughter! You're a parasite! Brenda, I said, staying by the car. Well outside the 500-foot zone the original order had specified for the shop. Though the domestic order for Robert was even stricter. You're breaking the law. Again, just get in your car and go back to your condo. I sold the condo! She screamed. I'm back and I'm not leaving until I see this place burned to the ground. The officers had heard enough. Threatening to burn down a house in front of the police is a bold strategy. They moved in. Brenda tried to swing her wine glass at the younger officer. He dodged it, grabbed her arm, and had her in a compliance hold before she could take another breath. She was screaming blue murder as they pressed her against the hood of the patrol car. The neighbors were all out on their porches now, phones out, recording the whole thing. The queen was being hauled away in zip ties because she had thrashed so much she broke the standard metal cuffs. As they put her in the back of the cruiser, she looked at Robert. Robert, tell them you want me here. Robert stood there, his hands in his pockets. He looked at the woman he had spent 4 decades trying to please. He looked at the ruts in his beautiful lawn. I don't even know who you are, Brenda, he said quietly. Drive safe, officers. This time the charges weren't just misdemeanors. Violation of a restraining order, trespassing, and attempted assault on an officer. The judge in our town had seen her before, and he was done. He revoked her bail entirely. She sat in the county jail for 3 weeks waiting for her hearing. During those 3 weeks, the silence was beautiful. But Sarah and I went to therapy together. It wasn't because our marriage was failing, but because she needed to unpack the 30 years of baggage Brenda had shoved into her brain. We talked about boundaries. We talked about how family isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card for abuse. One afternoon, the therapist asked Sarah what she wanted the most. Sarah didn't even hesitate. I want to forget she exists. I want to live a life where her name doesn't make my stomach drop. The final blow to Brenda's reign came during the divorce proceedings. Because of her criminal record and the documented history of harassment, the court was not kind to her. Robert got the house, got the bulk of the retirement. Brenda was left with her Florida money and a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. The last time I saw her was through a glass partition at the courthouse. She looked gray. Without her stylists, her expensive creams, and her audience of sycophants, she just looked like an angry, aging woman. She leaned toward the glass and whispered, I'll outlive you all. And when I die, I'm leaving every cent to a cat hush. Good for the cats, Brenda, I said. Enjoy the silence. I walked out of that courthouse and didn't look back. I drove straight to the shop. The line was long. The smell of cinnamon and yeast was thick in the air. Mia was laughing with a customer at the counter. Sarah was there, sitting at a small table, reading a book and sipping a latte I'd made for her that morning. I went behind the counter, tied my apron, and felt the weight of the last few years finally lift. We don't talk about Brenda anymore. Her Facebook was deactivated demotivated after she tried to harass the judge's wife. She's back in Florida now, living in a smaller place, presumably complaining to the seagulls about the quality of the sand. Every once in a while, a new customer will come in and ask about the mug on the pedestal. Mia or I will just smile and say it's a reminder that everyone is equal in this shop. The bakery is expanding next month. We're taking over the space next door to add more seating. I'm thinking of putting in a fountain. Nothing fancy. Just something with clear running water and perfectly square ice cubes. Not because Brenda would want it, but because I've earned the right to enjoy the little things without anyone screaming in my face. Life is quiet. Coffee is hot. For the first time in my life, and the only drama in my morning is whether or not the sourdough starter peaked at the right time. That's a trade I'll take any day of the week. The final nail in the coffin of Brenda's influence came exactly 2 years after the day she smashed those mugs. It arrived in the form of a legal notice from a firm in Boca Raton. She had passed away. It wasn't a dramatic exit. She hadn't been murdered or gone out in a blaze of glory. According to the report, she'd had a massive stroke in the middle of a high-end department store while screaming at a floor manager about the stitching on a handbag. She died doing exactly what she loved, making a stranger feel like garbage. Sarah took the news with a strange, hollowed-out kind of peace. We flew down to Florida to settle her affairs, mostly because Robert couldn't bring himself to do it alone. That walking into her condo was like stepping into a museum of bitterness. The walls were lined with framed photos of herself at various galas, but not a single photo of Sarah, Robert, or me. The air smelled like stale perfume and expensive gin. She really did try to leave everything to a cat sanctuary, just like she threatened. But Brenda, in her infinite arrogance, had tried to write the codicil herself to save money on a lawyer. She'd botched the wording so badly that the entire thing was tossed out by the probate judge. Everything, the Mercedes, the jewelry, the remaining cash from the divorce, fell right back to Sarah. I don't want it, Sarah said, standing in the middle of that cold, marble-floored living room. I don't want a single cent of her spite. We didn't keep it. We sold the condo in the car. We auctioned off the designer bags and the jewelry that she'd used like armor. Every penny of that money was donated to the nursing school Mia was attending, creating a full-ride scholarship for students who worked in the service industry while studying. We named it the Patience and Grace Fund. I think the irony would have made Brenda's head explode. The day we flew back home, the weather was crisp. The shop was busy as usual. Robert had taken over the task of watering the outdoor planters, and he looked healthier than I'd ever seen him. He'd started dating a woman from his hiking club, a retired librarian named Martha who laughed with her whole body and didn't care if her water was room temperature. I walked into the back office and sat down. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to check the security cameras. I didn't feel the phantom itch in the back of my neck wondering if Brenda was lurking around the corner with a plan to ruin my day. I took the Patience mug, the one that had survived the original massacre, off its pedestal. I brought it to the back sink, washed it thoroughly, and filled it with a fresh pour-over of our darkest roast. I walked out to the front, sat down next to Sarah, and we just watched the world go by. No one was screaming, no one was demanding a manager, there were just people talking. Steam from the milk wand hissing, and the quiet, steady heartbeat of a business built on hard work instead of entitlement. I took a sip of the coffee. It was perfect. And the best part, I didn't have to explain it to anyone. The scholarship fund changed the energy of the shop. Every time Mia walked in for her shift, she walked a little taller. She graduated nursing school 6 months after the funeral, and on her last day at the bakery, the regulars threw her a party that filled the entire block. We stood there, Sarah and I, watching this girl head off to a career of actually helping people, fueled by the very money Brenda had tried to use as a weapon. It felt like the final cleansing of the palate. With the shop expansion finished, we finally had the space I'd dreamed of. We added a small library nook and a long communal table made of reclaimed oak. I stopped being the guy who was always looking over his shoulder and went back to being the guy who obsessed over the hydration levels of his dough. The only remaining tie to that life was the occasional letter from Brenda's brother, Gary. He'd sent a few pathetic notes from prison, where he was serving time for an unrelated string of catalytic converter thefts. He wanted family help. I didn't even show them to Sarah. I just shredded them and put the confetti in the compost bin. Brenda's brand of poison was a closed loop. It had nowhere else to go. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, a woman I didn't recognize walked into the shop. She was in her late 60s, dressed in a simple raincoat, looking a bit lost. She stood in line, waited her turn, and when she got to the counter, she didn't order. She just looked at me. "Are you Mark?" she asked. "I am," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrap box. "I'm Helen. I live next door to Brenda in Florida. For the last 3 months of her life, I was the only person who would talk to her. Mostly because I'm hard of hearing and couldn't hear half the nasty things she said." I felt a slight tightening in my chest, that old reflex. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. She was a nightmare," Helen said plainly, no sugarcoating it. "But about a week before she passed, she gave me this. She told me if I ever traveled north, I should drop it off. She said she couldn't mail it because the post office workers were in on the conspiracy." I took the box. It was heavy. Helen bought a scone, thanked me for the peace and quiet, and went on her way. I took the box to the back office. Sarah joined me, her face wary. We opened it together. Inside wasn't a bomb or a nasty letter. It was a single, heavy silver sugar bowl. It was an antique, something that had been in Brenda's family for 3 generations. Taped to the bottom was a scrap of paper with 2 words written in her jagged, aggressive scrawl. "Keep it. No apology, no I love you. No, I'm sorry I tried to ruin your lives." Just a piece of silver she knew we'd recognize. "What do we do with it?" Sarah asked. I looked at the bowl. It was beautiful, high quality, and carried the weight of 100 years of family history that Brenda had almost succeeded in burning down. I realized then that Brenda's final act wasn't an olive branch, it was an admission. She knew she'd lost. She knew that the only way any part of her legacy would survive was if it sat on my counter, under my rules. "We use it," I said. I took the bowl out to the communal table and filled it with raw sugar cubes. I set it right in the center of the room. It's still there today. Most people don't notice it. To the customers, it's just a nice bit of decor in a cozy shop, but to me and Sarah, it's a trophy. It's a reminder that you can encounter a hurricane of entitlement and ego, and if you just stand your ground, if you refuse to be intimidated and rely on the truth, the storm eventually runs out of wind. Robert still stops by every morning. He's married to Martha now, and they're planning a trip to Italy. He doesn't look like an insurance man anymore. He looks like a man who finally learned how to breathe. He walked in today, saw the sugar bowl, and gave me a little nod. He knew. I'm 38 now. My hair is a little grayer from the early mornings, and my hands are calloused from the ovens. The shop is a staple of the community. We aren't just a place to get coffee. We're the place where people feel safe. Sometimes, when a customer gets a little short with a new trainee, or when someone tries to cut the line on a busy Saturday, I don't get angry. I just walk over, catch their eye, and point to the sign by the Patience mug. They usually settle down. And if they don't, well, the cameras are still 4K, the police are still 5 minutes away, and I've still got plenty of brooms, but mostly it's just quiet. The best kind of quiet. The kind you only get when the monsters are finally, truly gone. The Patience and Grace Scholarship grew legs of its own. 5 years in, we weren't just helping Mia. We were funding a whole fleet of healthcare workers who knew exactly what it felt like to be looked down on by people like Brenda. It's funny how that works. Her life's mission was to feel superior to everyone around her, and in the end, her liquidated assets became the ladder that helped those people climb over her memory. Sarah and I had our first kid 3 years ago, a boy named Leo. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't terrified the first time he threw a tantrum in the shop. I remember him screaming because I wouldn't let him have a third cookie, and for a split second I saw that purple hue in his face, the Brenda shade. I froze. I felt that old coldness creep up my spine, but then Sarah just picked him up, sat him on the counter, and spoke to him like a person. No screaming, no demands for subservience, just boundaries. He calmed down, wiped his eyes, and went back to playing with his wooden truck. trucks. That was the moment I realized the family curse wasn't a biological inevitable. It was a choice. Brenda chose her behavior every single day. We were choosing something else. Robert is a grandfather now, and he's obsessed with it. He comes in every Friday with Leo, and they work on the inventory together. Seeing Robert teach my son how to count boxes of oat milk with a genuine smile on his face is the most surreal thing I've ever witnessed. The man spent 40 years as a ghost in his own home. Now, he's the loudest laugh in the room. Shop is 10 years old now. We've had offers to franchise, to move into the city, to turn this into a corporate machine. I turned them all down. I like my 500-foot kingdom exactly the way it is. I like knowing the names of the people in line. I like that Mia, now a head nurse at the local trauma center, still stops by on Tuesday mornings for a double espresso and a chat. The silver sugar bowl eventually got a tiny dent in the side. One of the busboys dropped it while clearing a table. He looked terrified, knowing the history of the piece. He started apologizing profusely, his hands shaking just like Mia's used to. I just picked it up, looked at the little silver bruise, and put it back on the table. It's fine, Eric, I said. It's just a bowl. Everything breaks eventually. It's how you pick up the pieces that matters. I think that was the final moment of release. The bowl wasn't a sacred relic of a War I. It was just an object. Brenda wasn't a haunting ghost. She was just a memory of a lesson learned the hard way. Last week, a woman came in who reminded me of her. She was wearing a silk scarf and tapping a gold credit card on the counter, looking at the clock every 3 seconds. She started to snap her fingers at a new hire because her latte was taking too long. I didn't even have to step in. A regular customer, a guy who's been coming here since the day the mug shattered, just leaned over and said, "Take it easy, lady. The coffee's worth the wait, and the owner here doesn't take kindly to the snapping." The woman looked around, saw the patient's mug on its pedestal, saw the calm, steady rhythm of the shop, and actually lowered her hand. She muttered a small sorry and stepped back. I caught Sarah's eye from across the espresso machine. She was handing a croissant to a toddler, her face relaxed and bright. We didn't need to say anything. We had built a place where the air was too thick with respect for people like Brenda to breathe. I walked to the back, checked the ovens. I then started the next batch of sourdough. The timer ticked, the flour puffed into the air, and the world kept turning. No drama, no police, just the smell of good bread and a life well earned. I'm good, we're good. And the ice cubes, they're still just ice. The Patience and Grace Fund eventually hit a milestone we never expected. 10 years in, we had put 15 nurses, 3 social workers, and 2 teachers through school. We threw a gala, a real one, not the hollow, status-seeking kind Brenda used to haunt. We held it right in the expanded shop, moving the tables to make a dance floor. Robert was the guest of honor, and when he stood up to speak, he didn't stumble over his words once. He talked about how a legacy isn't what you take from people, but what you leave behind in them. Sarah and I are in our late 40s now. My Leo is 13, and he works Saturday mornings as a flower technician, which is just a fancy title I gave him for hauling 20-pound bags of King Arthur from the delivery truck. He's a good kid. He's got his mother's empathy, and thankfully my ability to tell someone to kick rocks when they're being unreasonable. He knows the mug story by heart. It's become a family parable, a cautionary tale about what happens when you think you're the only person in the room who matters. A few months ago, the silver sugar bowl finally gave out. The hinge on the lid snapped after years of being flipped open by thousands of hands. I took it to a local jeweler to see if it could be fixed, but the metal was too thin, worn down by decades of polishing and use. "I can solder it shut," the jeweler told me, "but it won't open anymore, and it'll just be for show." "No," I said. "If it doesn't serve a purpose, it doesn't belong on the table." I brought it home and put it in a box in the attic. I replaced it with a simple, sturdy ceramic bowl I made myself in a local pottery class. It doesn't have a pedigree. It didn't belong to a queen. It's just a bowl that holds sugar for people who need it. The most surprising thing happened last Tuesday. A guy walked in mid-50s, looking a bit rough around the edges, but clean. He sat in the corner for an hour, just drinking a black coffee and watching the room. When I went over to Bus's table, he looked up at me. "You're Mark, right?" I nodded, feeling that old, distant prickle of caution. "I am." "I'm Jeff," he said. "Sarah's brother, the golden child who had disappeared 10 years ago." He looked different, but the arrogance was gone, replaced by the weary look of someone who had finally hit the wall. He told me that after Brenda died and the money didn't come to him, he'd spiraled. He'd gone through a messy divorce of his own and spent a few years trying to outrun the shadow of the woman who had raised him to be a prince of a kingdom that didn't exist. "I saw the scholarship news online," Jeff said, twisting his wedding ring, or where it used to be. "I saw what you did with her money. At first I was pissed. I thought you robbed me. But then I realized she'd have spent it on a lawsuit or a designer rug just to spite someone. You actually made it mean something. I didn't invite him to dinner. I wasn't ready for that, and neither was Sarah. But I did sit down for 5 minutes. We talked about Robert. We talked about the shop. See, she was a lot, wasn't she?" Jeff asked, staring into his empty cup. "She was a hurricane, Jeff," I said. "But the thing about hurricanes is, eventually they blow out to sea. We're just the ones left on the beach picking up the driftwood." He left a $20 bill for a $5 coffee and walked out. I haven't seen him since, but Sarah got a text from him that night. It just said, "I'm sorry I didn't believe you." Sarah cried for 10 minutes. Then she deleted the message and went to help Leo with his math homework. Closure doesn't always come with a hug. Sometimes it just comes with an admission of the truth. The shop is quiet tonight. It's after hours, and I'm sitting at the communal table with a glass of wine. The streetlights are reflecting off the front window, the same window that Gary spray painted all those years ago. See, you'd never know it now. The glass is clear. I think back to that Saturday morning when the mugs broke. I think about the fear I felt when I dialed 911, wondering if I was destroying my family just to save my dignity. I know now that I wasn't destroying anything. I was just clearing the land so something healthy could grow. Everything in this life is a trade-off. I traded a toxic mother-in-law for a peaceful home. I traded a quiet life for a loud, bustling business that serves the community. And I traded the lie of keeping the peace for the reality of earned respect. I look at the Patience mug, still sitting on its pedestal. It's chipped now. The handle has a hairline fracture. It's lived a long, hard life. One of these days, it'll probably break for good. And when it does, I won't be sad. I'll just sweep up the pieces. I throw them away and put something new in its place, because that's the secret Brenda never learned. Nothing is permanent, especially not your power over other people. The only thing that lasts is the way you treated the person standing on the other side of the counter. I turn off the lights, lock the door, and walk home to my wife and my son. The air is cool, the neighborhood is still, and for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like a character in a story. I just feel like a man who's finally home.